Well, tonight we have our third meeting of our public input sessions, and I'm dressed a little different than I've been dressed before, Steve. I kind of wanted to keep up with you, but then you show up and you got a gray suit, a gray tie, a gray shirt, and I show up with a blue shirt, but I do have the gray tie.
You're supposed to wear blue for TV anyway, I understand.
Well, I heard that kind of takes some weight off, so that's why I did it. But anyways, it's been a great 3 meetings that we've had, and I know tonight's going to be really fabulous as well. The turnout that we've had from the public isn't what we had expected. We thought we'd have more people from the public showing up. So if you have the opportunity to watch this on RAC 8, make sure and give our office a call or talk to your council members or talk to the mayor or one of our staff members, because it's important for us to know if you as citizens of Willmar feel this is important. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get the information in front of the public so the public knows how we do this, make the decisions that we make. And so tonight, we're just going to kind of do a wrap up and just kind of talk about all of the different funds, all of the different resources that we have in front of us. And then we really don't have any follow-up questions because we didn't get any questions at the last meeting. And at the meeting prior to that, we had 4 questions, but those were all answered at the last meeting. So then tonight, if anybody in the audience has any questions, feel free to interject. Tonight, we also have Ike Holland, our city administrator, with us. And so Ike will make some comments right at the very end as well, just some wrap-up comments on how the budget works and that type of thing. So with that, Steve, I'll hand it off to you, and thank you for the good job that you've done through this. I think it's been very educational. You know, as the mayor, I've seen this many times, and the council has as well, but it's a little bit different format for how the citizens are seeing it. So thanks for the work that you and your office have put in to make this happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for coming tonight. There are handouts in the back as well as a sign-in sheet if you would be willing to do that before you leave if you haven't done it already. But as the mayor said, tonight's somewhat of just a wrap-up of what we've had in the first 2 meetings. And so the first slide I have is basically a summation of the meetings that we had. September 3rd is when the mayor handed and presented to the city council his proposed budget. That proposed budget is online and is available as well. It includes all the different funds that we're going to talk about tonight. As the mayor mentioned, on September 11th was our first public meeting in this type of format. We talked about revenues, and we'll kind of summarize that tonight too, again in another slide. And we've been concentrating primarily on the general operating fund. But tonight we'll also talk about the other programs that the city offers. Even though there is no general property tax dollars involved, there are fees and that, and we'll talk about those in a slide later on. Then on the 17th, the city council acted on a preliminary tax levy that has to be certified to the county auditor by the end of September. That preliminary levy, once set, can be lowered but cannot be raised. That levy was $5.2 million. And so it was roughly a 5% increase over the 2018 levy. And so that action will take place, as you see on the bottom there, on December 3rd. The council will take action and either ratify that or lower it, depending on the discussions and the discussions on the budget. Last week we talked about capital in this format, and again we have a summarized slide for that as well for tonight. And then tonight is kind of a summary of all of what we're doing. And as I mentioned, on December 3rd, everybody will be getting a truth in taxation notice from the Candioi County Auditor, not only for the city's proposed property taxes, but also the county and the school district. And then December 3rd is when the city council will hold their public meeting to finalize the budget and adopt a final levy. As I mentioned, we talked about, and the mayor has proposed a $17.7 million general operating fund. Those revenues, we have a slide that follows, and the capital improvement funds, which we talked about in the first meeting, was a little over $8 million. The $17.7 million general operating fund is funded through a number of revenues that we discussed at our first meeting. General property taxes is a good majority of that, probably the biggest majority of a little under 30%. The other item that we talked about in great detail at our first meeting was the local government aid, sometimes referred to as LGA. That is given to cities throughout the state of Minnesota based on a complex formula to try to even out property taxes for the citizens. The mayor is also proposing to use $1.4 million of fund balances That is a little higher than what normally would be. The procedure that has been used is any excess dollars not designated or restricted is made available to the current mayor, and they can then appropriate them moving forward. And all remaining other fees outside of those four major categories is roughly 23-24%. And if there are any questions as I'm going through this again, just raise your hand or interrupt me and we'll see if we can answer. Yes?
Where are like some of those all remaining fees coming from? Is that like from the hospital, their fees, that sort of thing?
That, the hospital is, building permits is a big revenue. There are handouts in the back of the room for that as well that list all the revenues that we had at our first meeting. There are some other state aids that come in, but primarily the Civic Center would be included in there. Building permit fees, those are some of the major ones that you see there. And again, that information is out on the city's website and available, as well as there's handouts in the back of the room.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? The next slide that you have on the handout would be the capital improvements. Those capital improvements, as I mentioned earlier, that we had discussed at the second half of our first meeting, includes $4.8 million of pavement management. Also, it includes $100,000 for the Menards Phase 1 stormwater project that will be studied and extended. The major project being done this year is being done on the Baker Diamond and going west. That's being handled this year. There's also discussion that they'll look at a second phase to that project from Baker Diamond north, so that eliminates some of the stormwater issues in southwest Woolmer. The other $100,000 is a continuation of playground equipment replacement. 2 years ago, the city went through their playgrounds and evaluated all the equipment that was in there. Some of it was aging, so there were some safety issues. They removed all those, and this is the third year of going back in and replacing a lot of that. The next page, the balanced budget. This is a budget that is balanced. The capital projects will be funded and paid for within the limits of the budget. Salaries for employees, there was a 2% contract. We talked about that last weekend when we were talking about fixed charges versus flexible, and what the mayor has as far as being able to flexibility of moving money around. And so that amount will be is restricted and is fixed. Levy increase of 5%, we talked about that. The actual dollar amount is a 5.5% increase, but with the new construction, which we talked about, the new construction was $16.2 million of actual tax-based growth in 2017. So far through 2018, the city has incurred $28 million through August of new construction. 22 million of that is actually taxable. So that will affect the levy for moving forward for 2020. It does not affect 2019. But as we talked about, the city is growing, and that tax-based growth will do nothing but help the impact on any kind of increases to offset any kind of cost. There are major projects that we talked about at the first meeting that are ongoing that will help on top of the 28 million that we've already incurred. There's a proposed packaging and distribution proposal for the industrial park. They're putting together a proposal for a whole block out there. There's a large implement on the south end of town, as well as a number of strip malls and apartment complexes that are going on that we'll be experiencing for tax-based growth. I mentioned the use of the fund balance reserves on the previous slide. Any questions on that? Outside of the general fund, which we have been concentrating on in the first two meetings that we've talked about, there are a number of other programs that the city does that there are no general property taxes that go for these programs. The Industrial Development Fund is the fund that was established when the airport was relocated from its old site to the present site. the sale of industrial park land, and any kind of costs that are incurring there. There's proposed to be about $182,000 of costs that are still incurred from that relocation of the airport. Some of that is infrastructure. There was some local option sales tax money that was used to pay for a lot of that. But in 19, we're proposing $182,000. The Convention and Visitors Bureau is another program that is paid for from the lodging tax. 3% lodging tax that's been in place for a number of years pays for the Convention and Visitors Bureau costs. Airport operations, primarily paid for from state and federal dollars. There is a small amount of local dollars that go in there, and there is somewhat of a transfer from the general operating. Community Investment Fund. This fund was established in 1990, a number of years ago. The city had a number of debt service accounts that they informally defeased. They took those dollars and dedicated them, and that fund was dedicated for the city portion of street improvements. So our 10-year street improvement program, whatever is not assessed is paid for through interest earnings and the utility fee, which is a public works reserve, and is not on the general property tax rolls. So there's a 10-year street program, and that is the annual amount that we need to retire the city portion of those debts. The debt service is the amount that would be paid for from this and the assessments that we receive from property owners. We have a 10-year street improvement program. The city has not only the street debt, but the waste treatment debt, which is included on the next line. The debt level that the city has at the end of 17 was about $78 million. The waste treatment fund is set by rates. This includes the debt service of about $3 million, the capital improvements, and any kind of operating costs. Totally paid for from rates from the waste treatment plant, which the city is presently engaging in a rate study, and will have that information available for the council yet this year by the end of the year, before they set the budgets in December. To somewhat summarize, we had the general operating fund of $17.7 million, total capital of a little over $8 million, and the all other programs that we just went through was a little under $15 million, for a total of about $41 million of total programs offered to the citizens of Womack. Of that $40 million, as I mentioned in the very first slide, $5 million is the general property taxes, which equates to about 13% of the total proposed for 2019. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know it was kind of short tonight, but we, again, we're trying to summarize, and so.
Thank you, Steve. I just wanted to make a few comments. First of all, thank you for your work over the last 3 weeks, and the mayor for putting this on for the public viewing. We had it in the public so that anybody could come here and ask questions if you'd like. And the other night when I spoke to the council about the budget is the most important document that the council has every year. And why? Because it dictates what we can and cannot do as a city organization, what streets will get paved, how many police officers we'll have, what kind of fire protection equipment we'll have, all these important things that people in the community depend upon, and even the things like our recreation and our parks activities. So this is very important. It's a document that I work on with the finance staff. Every month we go through it and we look at our revenues and our expenditures to make sure that we're tracking on a daily and a weekly basis, and if there's problems we can make those adjustments, and if need be, go back to the council. Also, I would like to say that we do this in public and we put these numbers online for everyone in the community to see, and if you have questions, why are we purchasing vehicles from this particular vendor, or why are we having this contractor, or why are we using this engineering firm? All of those things are important to people in the community. And the finance staff and myself and other members are always ready to answer those questions to anyone. So feel free, if you have a question, to contact City Hall via email or a phone call, or make an appointment to stop in and see us. So again, I just want to summarize. This is a very important process that we go through. It's a public process, and we're glad to present this tonight. With that, Mayor, I'll let you close.
Okay, maybe just a couple questions for you and Steve, Ike, if you want to just stay up here.
Okay.
You bring up a point, and you talk about the public process, and you talk about how people can be involved in what's going on.
Right.
And one of the ways is to review the budget, look at it, you have questions asked.
Right.
But, we have a formal process we have to follow when it comes to bidding, right? I mean, it isn't just that, you're the guy that sells pizza down the street, so we're gonna buy pizza from you. I mean, there's a formal process we follow, right?
Right.
Can you kind of explain that a little bit, how we do that?
We do have a formal purchasing policy that the entire staff has to follow, and that the directors in each department are responsible for following. So whether it's a street project or buying a vehicle or even our office equipment, we go through these procedures, and so that we make sure that we try to use local vendors, and that we also are competitive with the things that we buy. And so it can be laborious at times, but it's worth it to make sure that we're spending our public dollars wisely. And I will say that the finance officer goes through these documents, myself, and sometimes it requires the mayor's signature as well. So there's oversight for every department. So everything from the civic center to the wastewater treatment facility, all of these purchases are reviewed and make sure that they're financially responsible.
Sure. And then, Steve, can you talk a little bit about some of the bidding processes that we have to follow, like 429? You've talked about that, I think, at all three meetings where you talked about, we're complying with 429. So can you just share a little bit about that? I know in the first meeting you did talk about that. It just seemed we're wrapping up, just see if you can just kind of bring that back up, because I think a lot of times people just think, the finance director or the mayor or the city administrator or the public works director just calls a buddy and says, hey, come on over. I mean, that's not the way it works.
No, chapter 429 that you're referring to is actually dealing with street improvements and assessing for those improvements. And you have to, if you sell bonds, you have to follow a state statute, which is chapter 429, and you have to assess for at least 20% of that. There's also a secondary state statute dealing with the bidding laws, on where everything up through $25,000 needs to be quoted between $25,000 and $100,000. You need at least 2 quotes, and then anything over $100,000 requires a sealed bid, and all that is referenced in our purchasing policy that Mr. Holland referred to in his remarks.
Sure. So again, we're trying to have an open process here. We involve the council in all of those decisions. On those major decisions, those still go to the council, and the council still approves those purchases. Like at the last meeting, we bought a couple pieces of equipment for the wastewater treatment plant, and those went to the council. The council had them on a line item issue, and they could have either accepted or rejected them. They happened to accept the budgets or the purchase requests as they were presented. So, we've tried to be as inclusive as we can be. Again, if you have additional questions on the budget, contact any of your council members, myself, the mayor, or any people at City Hall. And Mr. Holland, our city administrator, did point out the fact that if you have a question and you want to be anonymous, you can just submit that on our website. It says report a problem or a question. You just click on that button. When you click on that button, it'll give you a pull-down screen. You just fill out that pull-down screen, hit submit. That goes to our IT department, and our IT department funnels it to the appropriate department where they can get the answer for you. So, again, Steve, Ike, thank you for this. Is there any questions from the public? Because we really didn't offer questions, but are there any other questions from the public that you would like to ask? Okay, thank you very much, and for those of you on our Rack 8, thank you a lot for watching. Appreciate it.